Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd. It is time once again for Talking Movies with Professor O. And today we're going to be talking about The Time Machine, a 1960 film with Rod Taylor, and Back to the Future, which was a 1985 film with Michael J. Fox and others. How are you doing this morning, O?
Doing great, trying to stay out of paradoxes and all the confusion therein. Even the word paradox takes me back to word problems and math, and I do my best with these time travel things.
Indeed. It's one of these kind of things, if you think too hard about it gives you a headache. But
yes.
Before we get started, I wanted to say something about we are taping this on the 29th, which is of October, which is a day after Hurricane Melissa hit Jamaica. And having been to Jamaica on two occasions, we feel for everybody that's there. They're wonderful people, and we're hoping that they'll be able to rebuild and get back to their very unique style of living over there. They say there's no such thing as a problem in Jamaica. There's only a situation, and they have quite the situation now. We hope that they're able to overcome that. They're very resilient people, so all our hopes are with them. Okay, let's talk The Time Machine. This is Rod Taylor's first starring role in a picture, and he is in this. It's based on the book by H.G. Wells called The Time Machine, and the book indicates that the main character is just called the time traveler. They don't give him a name. In the movie, they basically say, well, this is H.G. Wells. So it's not the first time. Well, it actually perhaps is the first time in which they put H.G. Wells in the story. They do that again in Time After Time, which was with Malcolm McDowell and Mary Steenburgen. But we're not going to talk about that this time, although we may slide into it. You never know. But the time traveler brings together a dinner party, and he's just gotten back from quite an adventure, and the movie is all a flashback on what happened to him when he left. And they start with the same group of people together as he's demonstrating his time machine, and then adventures go beyond that. He goes 800,000 years into the future and finds a society that is divided between people who are underground, the Morlocks, and the people who are above the ground and completely useless except for food for the Morlocks, the Eloi. So that's where we have most of the story. And we'll talk more about why this might have been Wells's story, because I find that kind of interesting. I've always thought of him as being a person that believed that there was a utopia in the future, and yet his book shows anything but.
That's a good point. With things to come and kind of a scientific utopia, that's a right. But anything but. And the book. It's been a long time since I've read the book. It's a great book. But in looking at some of the material, I forgot that the book is more dystopic than the film. The film softens up the future. Apparently in the book, the Eloi were more mutated, changed, whereas they look just like smaller. They try to make them look like smaller, blonde people in the film. But in the book, they kind of they resemble delicate deer that walk on two legs. And of course, the interesting idea, Wells's idea of what, the ultimate split between labor and management, or labor and capital, and the wealthy keep on not really doing meaningful lives, meaningful labor, kind of gather maybe inbreeding for the wealthy, and then the labor, the working classes, continue to dive into that, and so you got this devolution of the two classes into warlike Morlocks, very monstrous kind of beings, and so Wells is, and so they softened this in the film, and like I said, it'd been a long time since I read the book to realize that the screenwriter and H.G. Wells had kind of softened the end of the. And one kind of criticism that they got too is from Bill Warren, the guy who goes back and reviews classic films, is that they had the cause, instead of just a separation of capital and workers, instead they attribute it to nuclear war, where people just simply
Right.
live above ground versus below ground.
Yeah, and that goes back to the fact that the film was made in 1960, and so nuclear war was on everybody's mind at that point. If they were to make it today, it would be about some kind of plague or some kind of planetary failure, like it was in Soylent Green, or even in Omega Man, where some kind of mutation or some kind of disease or just some kind of natural disaster caused the problems. But
Would be the cause. Yeah,
yeah.
and I kind of disagreed with Warren. Warren said he was criticizing the film to a point, and he was saying that by 1960 we kind of even nuclear war and the warning, the sirens for an all clear or else go to the nuclear shelter, with the sirens, that classic effect, which was so chilling in this film. I thought that was worked incredibly well. But I disagree, because I thought, no, 1960, you're in the middle. When they're making this film, you're in the middle of nuclear fears, and the all clear warning would have been completely relevant and a good way to. Now, 800 years, 1,000 years in the future, who knows? But I thought that was awesome. That really worked well.
The stop during the 20th century, or however they decided to call it at that point, was. Of course, since the movie was done in 1960, it's easy to have a present-day city setting. But yet they made it even a little more futuristic. The air raid warden was wearing the uniform that they wore in Forbidden Planet.
I didn't catch. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Go back and look at that. You'll find that he's wearing one of the uniforms from Forbidden Planet from the ship. And also, well, there are other references to Forbidden Planet for some reason, that when he has gone forward to the knowledge rings that they have, in the background are set pieces once again from Forbidden Planet.
No, I did not catch that.
The navigator station is behind him, and there's also a piece of control panel that's
now that I'm kind of
right
backtracking that.
Yeah.
Now that I'm back, you can see that special room had some cool stuff in it, and that makes sense that they just pulled some stuff in. Yeah, well, the Morlocks were definitely not like the Krell in terms of their subterranean areas.
Well, this is something. Yeah, this is something else that was talked about. I listened to a BBC In Our Time presentation, a podcast, and they were talking about H.G. Wells basically, and they were saying that it's kind of interesting that they had the Morlocks who lived underground and were mutated, and the Eloi that lived above the ground that seemed to be more human, and then it's just the opposite of what we would find in a nuclear situation. Although, once again, I doubt that Wells had any concept of nuclear Armageddon or anything like that.
That's a good point. He does. He makes a good case for his case, a world building on his point of view. It works fine, and all of a sudden you're into it, and then you realize they're being bred to be fed to the Morlocks in their idyllic world. Yeah, that is dark. That is a dark concept for 1895 and 1960, but it was well done in the film. I mean,
it was, and I mean, there are certain things that probably were unfilmable, and certain things that would not fit with the sensibilities of the 1960s movie viewer.
Exactly.
And they do take some liberties with how the machine works, things like that. But that's all. There's a certain suspension of disbelief, because I mean, if you're going to believe that time travel is possible, then it doesn't matter what else is inconsistent about this, in my opinion.
Hey, that's a good point. And for the the crystal, just that it runs on, how is it powered? And I think that was I think they thought about that from what I saw a documentary on the making of the time machine itself
Yeah.
with the and apparently and they used like some sort of special crystal power, and so that's what he always takes his kind of like his key with him, and because that's the crystalline power that powers up the time machine.
Yeah,
But
they did
apparently
that. They
it
did
was
that in Time After Time, where they showed the crystal.
right.
I'm not certain that they were so specific about that in the Time Machine. He did take his controls with him. The book said that he took apart his controls and put it in his pocket so somebody couldn't steal the machine. In this case, he just took off that crystal handle.
Right, exactly, and it worked great. That was the making of the documentary on the making of the machine made that a little bit more clear that this is the true power source, and
Interesting.
that they came up with it. And of course, like we were talking about before, George Powell was inspired by sleds, and as you said, sliding makes you think of sliders in a sense, sliding
Yeah.
through time on a sled. And that became the sled then becomes the main design, what inspired the machine in the movie, the prop.
Really, when I think of a time machine, I think of that one. It was a very well designed thing. Wells didn't really tell you in the book exactly what the machine looked like, and so the director and the designers here, Wachang was one of the designers here. He was the person that developed all of the technology for the Star Trek TV series.
That's right. Yes, Watchang completely critical in designing this, and apparently the dish. And there was another, and I'll give credit to the other designer because in this little documentary they just spoke together. The documentary was made in 1987, and it's narrated by Rod Taylor, and so it's perfect kind of sweet spot. It's 25 years later, basically. And so everybody's still here watching, and so they were talking about designing it. And on that dish at the back that sits at the back of the time traveler, there's insignias or some sort of like a little like a symbol on the back. There's 365 of them. You'd never catch, one for each day of the year. You'd never catch that in the viewer.
You would not. The original intention was to make concentric circles, 365 concentric circles, and they couldn't do that. Well, they could do that, but they wanted to make it look more Edwardian, and so they did a bigger design.
Oh, they went to so much trouble for that. Combining something scientific circa 1895 with, of course, Victorian sensibilities. The chair, it works incredibly well. After the film, one thing Rod Taylor was talking about is after the film, I think there were, and if I got this right, there were, and I don't think I think it's a different designer, not the one from the original series of Star Trek, but one of the designers who later would work on the movie. I gather he was like a teenager, and he was inspired to make a model of the time machine, and he sent it to them. Like he was he loved the film so much, makes a model of the time machine, and then later on, this young man goes on to design stuff for Star Trek 4 instead of the original series. But I did lose track of exactly who that young man was. But there were some fascinating Trek connections. Another one was when the actual time machine as a prop just about got destroyed. It ended up in a thrift shop. One of the and there were people who were obsessed with finding it after it got sold. It was sold off in one of those.
It was an auction, the same ones they sold off Dorothy's slippers from The Wizard of Oz. And then it ended up in a thrift shop in Orange County, and a collector bought it for like $1,000, but it wasn't all there because it was meant to be taken apart so they could photograph various parts of it separately. The control panel with the dates on that could be taken off, and so they could film it straight.
Exactly.
And so a lot of that wasn't there. The chair wasn't there, which was an old barber chair, but they had a group of people restore that. Now
Dennis
there's an interesting
Dennis Mirren, the
Dennis
great
Mirren, Dorothy Fontana for some reason was part of that too. I'm not sure why, but anyway, The time machine, though, that has been restored is still in private hands. And when they wanted to borrow it or rent it for that episode of The Big Bang Theory, you remember that episode where they buy the time machine at an auction and have it in the middle of their room, and then Sheldon has a dream while he's sitting in it and that he's actually traveled through time. They had to actually rebuild that because they wouldn't let them rent the machine, and so they built a replica of it because they were able to get in touch with one of the who was the director, George Powell,
right
that and who gave them the plans to do it, so they were able to actually build a duplicate, or at least awesome. A non-working duplicate of it.
Thank goodness. Yeah, because that was and amazing how much of that actual model worked with in that documentary they describe a worm screw, a worm gear or something
worm
like
drive,
that. Yeah, worm drive. It's kind of like a barbecue spit. It almost sounded like, which
it's how the old wind-up phonographs used to work.
Gotcha. Okay, keep going.
The wind-up phonograph, you'd wind up the spring would undo, and it would have a worm gear that would then interface with the drive wheel on the platter. That kept it from
I did
the worm gear is not as choppy as a regular gear is, and so you're able to make it smooth, and that was necessary even in the 20s for playing records, and then they used it for that. That's kind of an interesting idea.
It's
It
fascinating.
saves you from having to make
dish. That's and when they
wanted to make it go forward in time and counterclockwise for reverse in time, but they had already built it one way, and they didn't want to go through the expense of building it to go backwards, and probably most people wouldn't have noticed it anyway. So it only worked clockwise.
That's right.
But it is one of the greatest props in history, though. I mean, I can't believe that anybody has ever come up with a better time machine. I mean, the DeLorean is one thing, but
it's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. But in any other situation where they have some kind of time machine, it's never as stylistic as that is. That's just kind of the what do you call that? The Cadillac.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yeah, it is. It is the Cadillac of all time machine. And it finally hit me too. Your description of the worm gear. Now they also mentioned barbecue spit, like something put when you put something on barbecue and you're turning it, and that's kind of then that's the gear that ultimately goes to the dish, and it kind of when you're looking at the mechanism. And I had a dark thought when I thought of what's on the barbecue, that the spit. I thought of the Morlocks, but I'm not going to speak of that anymore.
No, I do have a list of the visual effects people, and there's a big list. You may know what you might find the name you were looking for. Of course, Hua Chang was on top of that. Gene Warren, Howard A. Anderson. Okay, there you go.
Gene Warren was still alive when they made the documentary. Yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, Tim Barr, Bill Brace, Jim Danforth, Tom Holland, Phil Kellison, David Powell, Ralph Rodin, and Don Salen. They had some stop motion animation, of course, in there, and that was David Powell who did that.
Some of there's good things and not so good things about their effects, and we'll get to that in a minute. But they're uneven in the 1960 film for sure. We were talking before the show a little bit about connections between the H.G. Wells, the writer, the character, and Back to the Future. One that did hit me is, correct me if I'm wrong, when you're looking at the DeLorean in terms of how you set the time, what the present time is, where you could go in the past, where you could go in the future. Does that look pretty similar in layout? Just the big kind of
so.
Just in the way it's horizontally laid out to
They did a similar thing in Time After Time, where they had the machine that they used even for that looked very much like this one. It was just enough different that they wouldn't have to worry about copyrights or anything. But it had very similar. It was an enclosed, and it had very similar control panel though.
Gotcha. On that list of and I'm not gonna. Oh, one effect that was just magnificent that they did talk about on this documentary were the creation of the fruits, and it showed the stop motion creation of the fruits and flowers, and that was just stop motion animation of a matte painter drawing that stuff, drawing
amazing.
And the artwork, it's literal, and so everything's got to be perfect in his drawing. I mean, you could make splices in the film if something went a little bit off, but still, basically, it was just beautifully executed drawings using stop motion animation to show the growth. It's so good. I didn't even. You kind of know it's stop motion, but still, it's so good. You don't even think about how they're doing it. I didn't. It was in the documentary.
Yeah.
I realized that was just outstanding, and it fit so cohesively in.
They did so much complicated stuff, and that long list of visual effects people. The long list of visual effects people indicates that there was a certain time where he goes farther forward in time and then gets in the inside of a mountain.
Right.
And the reason they did that was because they didn't want to do any more special effects. They had pretty much burned their budget up doing, a lot of this very delicate stuff, and so for much of his journey, he's inside a mountain, so they'd never change his view.
One little funny thing with that is you just think about, because then then the mountain goes away, and he can start to see we're in the, way in like the year 750,000, for example. And you see these beautiful towers go up. It looks like something from the movie Tomorrowland. I mean, and he can't quite stop fast enough, because when he stops, those towers have started to melt and go and decay and deteriorate, and he ends up in the land of the Eloi. And it's say 25,000 years past those towers, past the prime of the future. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. And while he's inside that cave, all sorts of stuff is going by. And you buy it completely as a viewer.
Sure, why not?
And accept, right, because all that molten stuff would have come on top of it. And in fact, it's so logical. You're thinking he's going 800,000 years. He's in the same place. Why wouldn't you have a massive event like that? And the budget was only 800,000. So
unfortunately, it still didn't make its money back. It was not a successful thing. I think it only made like $5,000 in worldwide box office. It was a terrible failure, even though it's certainly a keystone of a movie about time travel.
Yeah, a beloved classic now. That is amazing. And so, how about other effects that worked for you, Professor B?
The one where he's leaving the 800,000 AD, and he accidentally goes forward, and he sees the body decomposing.
That was terrific. Yes.
The way they did that, they did a wax figure. They put it under a heating element, and then they sped up. They filmed it. They undercranked the camera for that, so that as he went forward in time, it slowly melted, and it looked like decomposition.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I didn't realize. I knew the wax on top of the skeleton, but I missed the fact that they were melting it. I thought they were doing stop motion. They would scrape some and then turn on the camera, scrape some more, run the camera. Instead they just filmed, kind of like a stop motion of the melting process, and it worked. But that eye coming out was wow. It could be. Yeah, I mean, they came close to maybe showing a Morlock meal in some respects, in terms of some graphic. But that was, you're right. He goes back. Then he goes back at that. That was a terrific effect. And there's a good article on it's time travel movies, including the Terminator, which and the clothes that you wear, that these characters will wear, and how important it is, how important their clothes are, the costumes are,
Yeah.
to them. And one of the best parts of that, it mentioned Back to the Future also. Marty, we'll get to that. Marty and his jacket. Everybody thinks he works for the Coast Guard. You know that.
Yeah.
He's with that little jacket that he's got from the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in this case, it's a very Victorian dress, and they point out that yeah, and you think as a viewer, you think, well, it's common sense. He's gonna be, but they really came up with a little extra detail with that dress, because the authors pointed out that it almost creates kind of a sphere around him. There's a sphere around, almost like you go in the time machine itself, that almost has kind of like a force field sphere that allows him to travel through time and not be, no falling rocks are going to come on him while he's going through. But kind of almost philosophically speaking, his Victorian dress really sets him, especially in the future with the Eloi and the Morlocks, it sets him in another space from the other characters. And the authors pointed out that for him to become an heroic action figure, action-oriented figure like he needs to be, he had to lose his Victorian jacket, and he does. He gets rid of that at some point and becomes much more of a heroic figure. The other, and of course, the other part of that was using costume, where you can look across the street and see the models, the mannequins, and all the dress changes, was a terrific way to go through there.
Yeah, I thought that was clever, although it does not coordinate with the moon and sun going by. There's one person walking down the street for approximately 3 or 4 days before it gets out of the camera range.
That was a simple effect too, to just put that light on a track and then animate it, and that was brilliant. That was one of the simplest things. So, okay, not so good effects. Did any not so good effects? and even though we look and say this is 1960, in George Powell's own movies, there were like War of the Worlds. The effects to me were a little just more cohesive, and I'm talking about I'm talking about that third nuclear war that unleashes an interesting idea. It unleashes the volcanic activity from the Earth. But oh god, the model cars, Bill Warren called it the oatmeal lava.
I've never quite understood how that. You probably know more about that, but the kind of lens that you use, the slowing down of the action in order to make a model look real, that obviously is a much trickier thing to do than I would think.
It is, well, the thing that gets me, and you can see it in World War II films. The very first film we did, one of the first films he did, the John Wayne naval film. What's the name of that again?
In Harm's Way.
In Harm's Way. The effects are fantastic, and it's part of the problems. The more you zoom in to something small, the more fake it looks. Things change with your depth of field. It just doesn't look right when you're zoomed in. So in Harm's Way, they build these, and they did the same in Tora Tora Tora. They build these gigantic ships, big model ships, like 20 feet big, and then they put them in a small lake. They put them in a lake, so you don't have to zoom in. You've got a wider angle perspective. Slow things down just a bit, like you mentioned, because slowing things down is critical to make this look real. And they did none of that. There were parts in Back to the Future where they messed up on all 3 of those. The models are too small. They had to zoom in, and they didn't slow things down enough, and the fire didn't look right. And what bothers me, if you're watching, say, Gorgo, say a film from a big giant monster film from the 50s, and it's just kind of like that all the way through. You just kind of go, okay, this is the world we're in. But this film has, the time machine itself is fantastic. There's so many good effects. It just doesn't fit in with this film.
I agree.
Section, there are a few
places where you can see 1960s film technology in which they've done some quickie effects that just didn't quite work. But that's something that's been, we talked about that even in Casablanca, where the plane lands and doesn't taxi, it just comes down and stops, and because the viewing audience weren't expecting realism. They know that it was a model plane that was going down. They knew that you weren't going to go through all of that. The point is to get to the meat of the story.
And rear projection was the same way. You're driving along, and you can change the background in rear projection, and it's very expressive. It's almost like German expressionism when you and we just kind of accept it. But by 1960, 20 years later, we're kind of starting, especially in the science fiction film, we're trying, and by 1960, we're kind of, and even George Pal helped push those envelopes. I mean, the effects in War of the Worlds are incredible. And so he had pushed that own envelope to where if he's going to go back and just feel like they're just cheating a little bit, when in that one sequence of the Third World War. Other than that, it's terrific. But that one, it just kind of stands out in a film where the effects are so good. But that's where in Harm's Way, the bigger models are better. What were you going to say, Professor B?
No, I was just going to kind of wrap this so we can go on to Back to the Future. But I wanted to say something about the cast before we go. This had kind of a who's who of 60s character actors. Of course, this was Rod Taylor's first starring role, but he'd been in other films where he was always just kind of there. Alan Young, who plays himself twice as David Philby, and then his grandson, James Philby. Was very hot at that time. He was going to 2 years later be the lead in Mr. Ed, and then left show business for 30 years after that. Came back in about 2002 for the remake of this, and then later made some things on some series, little walk-on parts and things like that. But he was he was Christian Scientist, and had decided shortly after after doing Mr. Ed that perhaps he didn't need to be in show business, and so stepped out of it for a time. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, and then of course we also had last week's bad guy from. He played the heavy, and he normally doesn't play the heavy.
Yeah.
That's
Whit Bissell.
Exactly, Whit Bissell.
Yeah. And Sebastian Cabot. Sebastian Cabot has never played but one character. I mean, he was Mr. French in Family Affair, but he was also in an old detective series called Checkmate, where he basically played, stuffy Englishman, which is what he always plays. And this one, he's a stuffy Englishman.
One more. Any other characters too? I thought one critic. I didn't recognize her in other parts, but the woman, that takes care of things. Well, and also, of course,
Mrs. Watchett, Doris Lloyd.
Doris Lloyd.
Yeah, she's Mrs. Watchett, which is kind of a pun on all the clocks and time travel that they have in this film. Of course,
Mrs. Watchett.
But I wanted to point out Yvette Mimieux. This was her first film in Forever, and she was only 17 at the time the film was made, and was therefore a minor and should have not been able to have worked a full schedule. She did. And in fact, the fact is that over the course of filming, she had gotten so much better near the end of the shooting than she did at the beginning. They went and reshot some of her early scenes so they would be all consistent. But and she did turn 18 while the film was being made, but started there working illegally.
At 17, that you can almost see, in some respects, you can almost see that progression as you watch the film. She really does in the later scenes as she begins to become more fully human. You can see that with her acting. I didn't realize that's an interesting point about that. The one thing I noticed in the documentary on the making of the Time Machine itself, the prop, they actually gave another end, kind of a coda to the movie. They all of a sudden, this little documentary becomes a narrative picture, and the time machine activates in a lab. And it's in a lab, and Philby, David Philby, is looking around this lab like he would be checking on his friend.
Sure.
Maybe, and all of a sudden the time machine comes, and it's perfect because it's 1987. Rod Taylor points out, they made Philby, same actor. They got this actor back in 1987, and so yeah, right. And so they made him look the same age, but they didn't have to do anything with Rod Taylor. And Rod Taylor points out, he said, well, the way time works, if I'd have come right back here, I wouldn't have aged, but I stayed another 20 years with the Eloi, and that's why I look like I do. And so they didn't have to use any makeup at all because it's 1987. And it's the nicest little, and basically the time traveler is there to get a hold of his friend because he knows he's going to die in World War I. And he's doing everything he can. It's kind of like Marty finally confronting Doc. Doc, I got to take you back. I've got to save your life. So he wants to take his friend to the future because he knows he's going to die. But the friend won't. He said, Philby says, I have my orders. And the orders are, of course, to go into World War I. And so basically, he turns him down, and Rod Taylor gets it back into the time machine reluctantly, but then he smiles. I think Philby says something like, what's that line? You've got all the time in the world. There's a line that they wrote, and Rod Taylor looks up and thinks to himself. He talks to himself quite a bit, like he did in both films. And so he says, he's right. I'm going to come back 3 days before he dies in World War I. And he knows how he dies. He dies in like a Sopwith Camel. He's flying. He's a pilot in World War I. I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to confront him and take him to the future. And so that's the way it ends. But it's the nicest little ending to the time machine. They really went in full character. You had both actors, and it was pretty well directed. Like lasted about 10 minutes long. A little short film to wrap up the time machine.
Yeah. One other actor I want to point out here, he's uncredited, but the voice of the Talking Rings was Paul Frees. Now, you may recognize Paul Frees. He was the narrator for Hardware Wars, that short, if you remember that one. He had the very basso profundo voice. He was also the voice of Boris Badenov in the Bullwinkle cartoons. He was also the voice of Poppin' Fresh, but he had quite a vocal range. But anyway, he was very rarely. I think he was only in one movie where he actually was playing a part. Everything else, he was always voiceover.
That's fascinating. What was the movie he played a part? Do you have that, or
don't remember?
Don't remember. Well, that ring sequence was nice too. That was you're thinking, how are you going to 800,000 years in the future? How do we store our memories and how do we store the past? I thought that ring was so simple, worked incredibly well.
Yeah.
And then no picture, basically just all his voice, and you just got to imagine that stuff in your mind of the unending nuclear wars, where people are going to go. It worked out incredibly well.
Yeah.
So simple. Just
this has nothing to do with the movies, but it has to do with Paul Frees and William Conrad were both very good friends.
Really?
And, you remember William Conrad from Cannon. And if you're an older fellow than us, you might have rememred him from the radio version of Gunsmoke, where he played Matt Dillon.
Oh,
he wasn't able to play.
That.
He wasn't able to play Marshall Dillon on television because they wanted James Arness, who was like 6'5", and William Conrad was, 5'10" and 260 pounds. It wouldn't
kind
have
of
worked.
stocky back then too.
Would not have worked. Would not have worked for Matt Dillon. But he and Paul Frees both worked on a CBS radio program called Suspense. And Paul Frees was the narrator, and William Conrad was in many of the episodes. And sometimes they would trade places because they could both do impressions of each other.
That is amazing. that is amazing. William Conrad, there's a lot to William Conrad. He gets kind of frozen in that Cannon role, but he was in some other good roles. And
he was in Bullwinkle as well. He was the announcer in Bullwinkle.
I did. William Conrad, yeah.
Yes. And we had a little bit of a technical difficulty. It turns out that my neighbor's internet went down, and the technician went and unplugged all of us for a bit. So we've had to take a little break. But we are back now. Welcome back. We're going to talk Back to the Future. And Back to the Future is, unlike The Time Machine, was a very successful picture. In fact, it was the highest grossing picture of 1985. And it was one of these kind of things like we've talked about before, where movies almost don't get made. And this one almost didn't get made for two reasons. One was that the teen pictures of the time were usually a lot raunchier, like Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And so they considered the plot of this to be too tame to be a teen picture. And so they took it to Disney, and Disney didn't like the idea that his mother was falling in love with him back in time, and that made them kind of queasy. That was before Touchstone became a big thing, and that and they were trying more mature movies. So this finally got greenlit by Universal, and they went to work on this. They wanted to change the name of it to Boy from Pluto, because they thought Back to the Future didn't sound right. And the higher ups, whoever came up with this idea, the higher ups at Disney thought it was a joke and laughed at it, and so he pretended it was a joke, and so the title stuck.
Right, because they didn't want to offend the higher ups with that horrible idea. So
Yeah.
they basically, oh, what? That was so funny. Thanks for the joke of the day. And then saying, yeah, because that was, what a name. That would have killed it. I mean, that might have
really
killed it. It would have made it. Yeah. Wow.
Well, the whole thing about this film, I rather like. I mean, you know, there are people who have, and we had read an academic treatise on this film, and I don't think the guy got it.
No.
Frankly, I think if he'd watched a Marx Brothers movie, he would have found that it really wasn't so relevant to the time that it was made, and that's what he thinks of Back to the Future. I think that it's just a comedy, and that they were going for the jokes even in the title. Back to the Future is kind of an oxymoron, as is the name of the town that they're in, Hill Valley. Which, so
I had not thought of that. That's exactly right. Hill Valley, right. Loaded with paradoxes and oxymorons. Right. That's no, and it's funny you mentioned. I'm glad you brought that up. That article. It's yeah. Some of the in the academic world, which Professor Bean and I have belonged to.
But we don't write. We don't write like that. I just have to say that.
No, and there's some articles that will hit the mark and really make you think, and then there's some that you go, no, this is a fun movie. That yes, it's made in the Reagan era, but to go overboard on some of these things is to read so much into it. When I mean, you're talking Doc and Marty, Rick and Morty, you know, and as it evolved to, it just it's a fun comedy. That, like, and we were talking about this earlier in the show. The only thing that some of those articles I can see how at the end of the movie, which we'll kind of cover the plot, but in the movie you do get into some version of yuppieism, which was part of the Reagan years. But even that is kind of lightly handled, and it did go a little overboard for me, just a little bit into the yuppie thing. The guy didn't necessarily have to have a BMW out there. The dad's got a BMW that he has Biff clean. But anyway, back to the beginning of Back to the Future. That's the end. But I love that. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's not necessarily our take in this film.
No, it's a fun picture. It's played for laughs from the beginning to the end, all the way to my favorite is Mr. Fusion. It was a hubcap of a Dodge Polara with a Krups coffee grinder on top. That was Mr. Fusion.
That was Mr. Fusion.
Yeah.
And the stuff he puts in it, I had forgot he put the beer can in it. I knew he put lettuce in there.
In an earlier draft, they were going to claim that it ran on Coca-Cola rather than uranium, But my guess is they stopped that when they got Pepsi as a sponsor in the film. You know, they had a lot of product placement in there, and they had Pepsi and a big controversy about raisins. The Raisin Board of California wanted them to have a big bowl of raisins at the Under the Sea prom. And when they filmed it, they said it looked like a bowl of dirt. So they didn't do it, and then got sued by the Raisin Board because instead of doing that, they put the billboard of the on the park bench that the drunk was sleeping on when Marty comes back, and they really didn't like to be associated with drunken men. So that was a big problem for them in product placement. But
I mean, right? That's not necessarily a good decision. Although the drunken man, one tiny, just we hope Professor B and I will really try to do some research on these things, and you're trying to hold onto these slivers of that research. And just while we're there, the drunken man was later in John Carpenter's They Live. The homeless guy on the bench kind of plays a similar part.
He was a character actor, and he was also in the, let's see, when George McFly is not going to go to the prom because he's going to stay and watch sci-fi theater.
Right.
The guy that plays the drunk, let me find his name. Do we even have him in here?
I'm sure I missed the dance to watch Kolchak back in the day. I was thinking of that. Yep, I'd have been.
They don't have him listed here. He must not have been credited. But as the wait a minute, I can do it under this. It takes me a little while. We're having a slow way of getting through, but it's important to say because it has a clever little touch here. And Red the Bum. His name is George Buck Flower, and he was in that science fiction theater episode that would have aired that year, and so that's part of the reason they used that. They had a number of Easter eggs in this, which included, for instance, Old Man Peabody, whose place that they built the mall on top of. He was raising pines. His son was named Sherman.
Oh, that's
so from the Bullwinkle Peabody's history.
Again.
We're back to Bullwinkle with Peabody's history, and so it was Old Man Peabody and his son Sherman, and they have a few things like that as well. So you can look through this and find where they want to throw their jokes, and they're all jokes. They're all good jokes, and some of them that you can follow, and some of them that you'll have to look up years later.
I'm sure I was watching Kolchak while missing the dances, but I never imagined that at those dances there'd be a big bowl of raisins on the table. What dance doesn't have a big bowl of raisins on the table? Yeah. There's so much about this film. It is just brilliant.
I was about to say that they could have put it in the punch, but it would look worse, wouldn't it? Yeah. I'm afraid.
That's exactly right. There's just but to put it on, that is, and that's it's funny you mentioned that you kind of, just for listeners a little again, there's some criticism of like, whoa, he comes back to our time, and the first thing we see is a homeless man, as if the filmmakers are kind of treating that lightly or treating it like a cliche. I didn't feel like that. It's not like Marty. I don't feel that he does not have empathy for the homeless man. It's just that is his world, which is a kind of comment on our world. It was so funny when he comes back to the future and there's the X-rated, there's the church in the movie theater, which is, whoa, that's become common. And then then the actual theater that's running movies is running X-rated movies, and Marty almost takes I'm back. And that in itself is kind of, it's not commenting so much on our world. It's just the way things are in some respects.
Oh, that's the other thing, that the guy that was on the bench was actually in that movie.
Oh my
He,
goodness.
he had gotten to making porn movies after a certain part of time.
Well, at some point, John Carpenter rescued him, and he has a
Yeah,
great part in They Live.
yeah. So there's
Wow.
yeah, this has layers upon layers of
Layers upon the only other criticism I've heard too, and this is an interesting one. It's like it takes Marty uh, to then give Chuck Berry through his cousin
yeah,
that Marty is the one who actually inspires that music. But I've heard another way. But then when you actually watch the film, it's just the spirit of it is different. Like we were talking about in some respects with the Omega Man. When you watch the film, there's a different spirit into that, and in some respects, I mean, the Chuck Berry band, that band is terrific, and Marty works with them, works together with them. I heard somebody say, well, Marty could have been thinking of Elvis. He could have been inspired by Elvis with his music, who
yeah,
in turn took his style so much from Chuck Berry. And now finally it's getting back to Chuck Berry. And it is finally Elvis, by stealing the music, it's finally getting back to Chuck Berry, who originated it in the first place. That's
yeah.
kind of convoluted, but I've heard that explanation.
Well, once again, I believe that we can overanalyze this
Yeah.
because it's all done for jokes. It's he's playing Chuck Berry, and it just so happens that his cousin
Oh,
is performing there, and he calls up Chuck and says, "I got an idea for your music." It's just a joke,
eh,
and if you try to put this, and a lot of people tried to go with their predictions in Back to the Future 2, their predictions for the future, how accurate were they? They weren't going for the any predictions. They were going to something silly.
going for something
The
silly.
self-lacing sneakers and people wearing their pants backwards. It was just how silly can we get with this?
Exactly
And
right. And that's not a comment. That's a good point. That is not a comment. The but some of the funniest things in listening to some of the actors, I know we're kind of going all over the place, but
sure,
in some of the actors who Marty Michael J. Fox has to play the straight guy so much for so much of the film. The jokes are built around so much of him playing the straight guy, but in
right.
that dance, he's got some of the funniest. Just the way they shoot his head popping up and then Doc kind of mirrors that, the way those heads just pop into frame, like when Doc's hanging onto the clock and battling around. Finally, Marty gets to do some fun stuff in that Chuck Berry number. That's kind of
There
funny.
are little places that I really like in this. For instance, when he first meets Doc, he says, "Well, we're going to have to repair the machine and send you." And he looks into the camera, "Back to the Future," and Marty kind of looks toward the camera as well, just for a beat, as if to say,
Just
"What?"
for a beat, and then it almost is. Then he looks a little Doc, like, Doc, you're breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah,
That's
almost.
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah,
Oh,
I loved that little piece in there, and that's just the subtlety. Another thing, there were a couple of places where there were a couple of suggestions Michael J. Fox had. For instance, one was when he's wakes up in Lorraine's bed, and
right.
he says, "Where are my pants?" Her line was, "Over there," and he
Yeah.
suggested, and they accepted, "Over there on my hope chest." That was his idea. That was a line. And the other is where he's putting his pants on and falls down is a pratfall he just did,
Oh,
just for
he just
indicates his nervousness, but that wasn't directed. That was ad lib. So,
and he's on max 4 hours of sleep because
and
he's
there's more ad
thinking.
libs in there too. Biff, what are you looking at? Butthead was ad libbed, and so was Make Like a Tree and Get Out of Here.
Oh, that's
Which, yeah. So both of his real iconic lines he made up himself, and he modeled that. He had been bullied as a child, interestingly, and so he almost didn't want to play the part because he didn't want to play a part of something he detested. But he was able to use that and satirize bullies, and that's what they did with showing that he wasn't all that bright. Make like a tree and get out of here.
I that's that's fun. I did not know. I was kind of going the other way. Wow, Biff, that's kind of ironic. That, yeah, a paradox. Another Hill Valley. Oh,
I don't think
God.
I heard that expression until I was in college, make like a tree and leave. But,
That's
I thought it was clever.
that is one of those things I was thinking. Now that's borrowing from the future to go back to the past. But that line didn't seem to come from the 50s. I love the kid's raccoon hat. I mean, there's so much that's just spot on from the 50s. I guess
Yeah, there was a lot of Davy Crockett references. They were playing the song in the when he first goes back to the past, and then walks into Hill Valley, and then they have it in the record store of the record that had come out with Fess Parker doing the song, and then of course, they showed Coonskin's hats on more than one occasion. One, of course, was the his uncle or whatever that was wearing one.
there was so many fantastic references. And so the script takes about 4 years to write, and apparently and maybe and basically they just kept on working it all the way through. You're right, with the ad libs, and then even through production, they're just and really making a case for improving the script. The original ending, and I know you know this is they were going to the time machine was like a refrigerator. You go inside the refrigerator.
That was the second version of it.
That's right.
The first version was a laser. It was just it was basically a gun, and they've used that interestingly in Rick and Morty. But they decided that that wasn't a good idea, and the refrigerator thing was abandoned pretty quickly because they were afraid kids would lock themselves up being time travelers in a real refrigerator. And
it comes even back though they Indiana used Jones 4.
It does, and it was
refrigerator and nuclear weapons. It's a mix with the nukes at the end too. It's good.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole thing. The nuclear weapons, and even after they decided on doing the DeLorean, they were going to have to drive it to a nuclear test in order to send it off.
New Mexico.
And basically their budget wouldn't allow it, and so that's when they came up with the idea of the lightning strike. But and then rewrote the first part where they established the saving the clock tower and all that. So all of it was to build jokes. Even the DeLorean itself was used so that when he lands in Peabody's barn, that they'll think it's an alien spaceship because of the gull wing doors. And that was the only car in production at the time that had gull wing doors. Otherwise, they thought the car was a piece of junk. And despite the fact that DeLorean himself sent a love letter to the production team after the movie came out, thank you for highlighting my car in such a way. But it was a terrible car. It had a 6-cylinder Volvo engine in it, and the speedometer would only go to 80 because in that year the regulations were that you couldn't put because at that time you had to drive 55, and so they mandated that speedometers stop at 80 for cars that were built that year. And that was overthrown the next year, and so everything went back to normal. But they had to put in, different speedometer in the car in order to make it show 88 miles per hour. So little things like that. But
they bought 3 DeLoreans, I think, and cut one in half so they could shoot in the front end of it and also the back end.
During different parts of the production, they would cut parts of it out so they could show different things.
Right.
But, they said in the one that drove, Michael J. Fox got a variety of bruises and cuts based on the stuff that they'd put in there. When he'd shift, his elbow would hit something sharp.
Oh, it was chock full of stuff.
But these days, if you buy one of these reproduction DeLoreans, which they do somewhere in Texas, they come with a flux capacitor. Obviously not working, but they have one in there, which I thought is kind of interesting little addition to make to.
I will admit, at the end of the day, we're wanting one of those DeLoreans. It's so cool. It really was. Car. And the artwork where they did, that's 2 times in the film where they really made plausible artwork, because the farmer's kid, of course, his viewers know well that he's holding a comic book that's got, you know, where like a UFO has landed in the barn and it looks
Yeah.
just like the DeLorean. But they made it it just has that perfect cross referencing of being looking like a car with gold wings, but then you can also buy, yet completely accept the comic book cover, which looks like a UFO, and
Yeah.
that's and of course then when Marty, and it's so well thought out. Marty has got that radiation suit hat, you know, gear that he accidentally pops on his head, and then he comes up, and there he is, the alien, and it's absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
And the farmer's family does not flee. Don't mess with that farmer. And then of course the second time is when, with the perfect comic book cover, is when they trick his dad into the Darth
Right.
Vader. Yeah, such a
I'm Darth Vader from Vulcan. They originally didn't want that line. They wanted the studio wanted him to say that he was from Pluto, and that's where they had the idea for, you know, Future Boy from Pluto is the title of the movie. But thankfully that went away. And the
Vulcan.
tape that he plays, Van Halen, on the tape it says Edward Van Halen. It doesn't say Van Halen with the logo, because the band would not allow any of its music to be used in the movie. But Bob Zemeckis asked Eddie Van Halen himself if he would do a few licks just to put on in that scene, and so he did it for them. And so he wasn't doing it under the auspices of the band, but just himself.
Eddie Van Halen. Yeah,
Yeah, Edward Van Halen.
that was, at least he did that, because that is, why would you not want to be associated with that film?
Well, yeah, nobody. I mean, you know, this is where we are right now with the '80s films. Most of them were exploitation films, really. I mean,
Yeah.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High was probably one of the mildest at that point.
Used
And they
cars
had-
was worse. There was a used car
Yeah.
Kurt Russell film that was worse, and that's what they were looking for. You're right. That's what so many of them were looking for. Hey, make it like that.
And there were a couple of Roger Corman things. Wasn't Roger Corman? They did the van and the this whole series of pictures where it had, you know, it was where, you know, Cheech and Chong would have seen high art compared
right.
to these things. You know.
100%. That's exactly right.
So there was a lot of that going on in there, and so I don't know that anybody would have thought that this film would have done well. But
And what's amazing is I didn't realize Zemeckis had done, and I remember this film. I kind of enjoyed the film. The Romancing the Stone. So he
Yes.
basically takes that on. It's amazing how, in some respects, we've covered writers who are just desperately shopping their material and sort of found their way and were kind of ignored, like Dan O'Bannon to a point, who also has
Yeah.
made his way in some respects, but definitely feels slighted from the Alien experience. But or Blade, no, I think it was Alien, yeah.
Yeah,
But
same.
but on the other hand, Zemeckis, you know, you on some level you feel like, oh, these two Bobs, Bob Dale and Robert Zemeckis, and you feel like, oh, they're struggling. Well, he tells Spielberg, he says he wants Spielberg to help, but he says, if you help me and it doesn't work, I'll never have a career, because I'll have done 3 films in a row that had failed, 1941 being one of them.
Yeah.
And so Spielberg says, yes, I get it. And so all of a sudden, somehow it just gets passed to him, the script for Romancing the Stone, which is a terrific property. It becomes a hit. Then he can do this movie. But they definitely, if that's the level of struggling that's going on, you're still paying the bills. You're not having to do 3 jobs to somehow work at a video store and write. Obviously, they were still doing okay, even though they were being turned down 40 different times, which is amazing too.
And thankfully, because of Romancing the Stone, that's how they got on at Universal.
Right,
this,
makes me.
so.
And it's a darn good movie, and I'm grateful to it.
Yes, I enjoyed that picture. I've used to have the hots for
Kathleen Turner.
Kathleen Turner, who just, you know.
And it's just incredible how that name rolled off my tongue like that.
I'm glad it did. I lost a brain cell there for a moment. But anyway, there were a lot of subtle things. Also, they were all jokes. The car was so they could do the alien ship joke. The the Twin Pines Mall. When he runs over the pine, becomes Lone Pine Mall. When they come back to the present, there's a number of things that are different besides his parents and Biff.
Right.
And it's interesting, after he's gone to college and written books, that he's still in the same house. But once again, it didn't serve any jokes, so it just
it serves the jokes beautiful. And I run the beginning of that in classes to show where, and it's funny, in a lot of the commentary, I didn't watch the full commentary for the film, but I watched the commentary for the deleted scenes.
Yeah.
And so many times it was Bob Dale who was talking, but he said,
Yeah.
if you say the joke once, don't say it twice. He says, as screenwriters, we're so worried will the audience get it that we put things in twice. And so the deleted scenes a lot of times were just reinforcing a joke that didn't need to be reinforced. And that was the idea with the Twin Pines. There was a joke you just made, but anyway, that kind of idea. Don't overdo things, and it's just and in doing that, let the audience think, let the audience catch that there's only one pine. What was it called? It's Twin Pines Mall. It becomes Lone Pine Mall.
Yes,
and that's just it's beautiful. They didn't overdo that.
No. Well, Huey Lewis playing the principal, who thought that the music that he wrote actually was too loud. Too darn loud.
I did not realize that. That is incredible. It's just too loud. Okay, and that made for a nice connection. There are moments of kind of poignant moments, because when one of the nicest connections is for Marty see his dad doing something creative. Wow, I didn't know you did anything creative, Dad. And tries not to say Dad all the time, but there he is, and then the father says, "I'm afraid of being rejected," and then you cut back to that scene where Marty's rejected, and they both have that in common. They know what it is to be turned down, and just some nice connections in a really good comedy. Just wonderful connections like that.
They said that Ronald Reagan especially enjoyed. He was president at the time. Really enjoyed the thing when in the film where Marty says, Ronald Reagan is the president, and Doc says, who's vice president? Jerry Lewis, and they said that Reagan had the projectionist roll the film back and play that over and over.
and it's so true. Doc is picking up on he's already seen the TV studio. Wow, it's incredible. You got this TV studio. It's so small. Everybody's on TV. And of course, he says, what figures? Your president's a TV star. And it just
that was kind of telling. There was other thing too that, in fact, they said in the 1986 State of the Union address, he quotes Back to the Future, "Where we're going, we don't need roads." So Reagan really liked that. Really liked that movie. But they said, though, in the screening room, that when in that same thing where Doc is reacting, and I suppose Jane Wyman is the first lady, and everything goes stone quiet in the White House because nobody on staff could utter her name.
Oh my!
They were divorced in 1949. So if it actually been 1955 at the time they were there, he would have known that Reagan had already married Nancy. But
Jane Wyman in the White House, do not mention her name. Wow.
Jane Wyman was already on television by that time, and so I think it was more for the joke than for historical accuracy. And the thing with Jerry Lewis too. Jerry Lewis was not a solo act until a couple of years later. So he was still with Dean Martin, and so Martin and Lewis, they wouldn't have considered Jerry Lewis by himself. But once again, it works in 1985 because everybody knows who Jerry Lewis is.
Right. That's exactly. It works in 1985.
Find as zany a person who was working during that year that it worked. So I figured that that some of these things, they weren't intending for historical accuracy. They weren't making any kind of political statements. They were just trying to go for the joke.
Right. There is a good-looking Studebaker that I think came out in I love cars, and there was it came out in 1958, and I on the street. Yeah, but you can't do no.
The guitar that Marty plays at the Enchantment Under the Sea is doesn't come out for another couple of years until that happens. So I mean, they weren't worried too much about absolute accuracy on this.
Yeah, no. The jokes, it works perfectly. It just and I did not know that about Biff, that actor had been molested, and so he really was worried about
just bullied.
Bullied. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Glad we clarified that. But still, because boy, does he play a bully. I mean, he's one of the most authentic bullies in a film that he's
absolutely and of course is just about as opposite to that in real life as possible. I've seen him in an interview, and he was worried that people would think that he was really like that because he was just he didn't believe one thing of that kind of type. Although there was a problem between him and Eric Stoltz. Now we haven't mentioned, but a lot of people know that Eric Stoltz was originally cast as Marty because they wanted Michael J. Fox, but they couldn't get him because Meredith Baxter was pregnant and off on maternity leave at the time that they were going to start filming this, and so they couldn't release Michael J. Fox because they needed him on each episode.
From Family Ties.
Family Ties.
Right.
So with that, they wouldn't let him off. And so they hired Eric Stoltz, who's a method actor, and irritated a lot of people on the cast.
Right. He would only respond to being called Marty. If you said, "Hey, Eric, let's go out to eat," he would just look at you.
That's correct. That's correct.
Marty, you want to have some lunch between takes?
Yeah. But the problem with method acting is that you inhabit the character. And if you inhabit the character a little too much, it can cause problems. And really, the only person that really liked him was Leah Thompson, and she didn't want Michael J. Fox in there because he was a television actor, and she'd already done movies, and still there was this prejudice between movie actors and television actors.
Right.
But Tom Wilson, Biff Tannen, was supposed to be the bully, and in a fight that they're having in the cafeteria or something like that, Eric Stoltz actually hits him rather than just fake things and cause certain bruising. And he warned him a couple of times, don't do this. This is play acting here, and had intended to get back to him when it came to the time to beat him up in the
in the fight at the end.
But since they changed the actors before that scene was done, he never did that. But that's kind of an interesting thing that he just he wasn't being mean, really. He was just being in the character and went a little too far with that.
Right. Wow. They could have gotten I'm channeling. I'll just Marlon Brando to play Doc. If you're going to go for method acting all the way around, that would have been a different film.
Now there were a bunch of people that they wanted to play Doc. They wanted,
they did not want Marlon Brando. I was just kidding.
No, they didn't want Marlon Brando. No, not at that point. But they did have Jeff Goldblum was one of the ideas.
That's right.
And
would have done well.
I always forget his name. He was Third Rock from the Sun. He was.
Our viewers are telling us it'll come up.
They are.
It will happen. John Lithgow.
Yes, he was also considered. I thought he would make very good.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. Kind of, yeah, channel is zany. That would have worked, but it worked out great with.
It did. It did.
Oh,
But there were about a dozen people that were thinking that might be appropriate for that mad professor or mad scientist kind of character, and I could see where Goldblum could make that work. I could see where Lithgow could make that work. I mean, Lithgow had already played a mad scientist in Buckaroo Banzai,
right.
although many people hadn't seen that film.
Right. Good point. They had not seen that film at the time. There's a really interesting point that Eric Stoltz had brought. He viewed it as a tragedy also. And of course, method actors will do that. They're going to read the script and read between the lines and channel their own their experiences they've had in life to bring that to the character, to fully inhabit the character, and also add more to the entire experience. So he sees it as a tragedy, and I kind of get that at the end. We were talking about that. Could there have been one? And the only way Michael J. Fox plays this, the tragedy being that when Michael J. Fox comes back to the future, all of his memories of that family are changed or gone. It's not the same family, and all of those, but he's got those memories, and so it's kind of like those memories. What happened to that family? In a sense, 85% of that family changed for the better. I'm not they could they have been a little bit warmer before they became yuppies? Yeah, they could have been warmer human beings. But so one look by Michael J. Fox is like, maybe catching that I've lost my past. But Eric Stoltz wanted to play that and let it inform the whole movie, and that didn't work. That's not the film. And it was a good call. I think they shot about half of the takes with Stoltz.
About 40 minutes of the film, I understand.
Wow, 40 minutes. Yeah. So a lot of footage, and then this is one of those films we need to call ourselves the Chronology Challenge podcast, because all of the films had been based that we've talked about had hard release dates, and all sort, like Star Trek: The Motion Picture has this hardcore release date of basically Thanksgiving 1979. This release date was supposed to be, I think, August or something of 1985, but because of production problems, you'd think if you lost your main actor and had to film, basically like 40% of the movie again with an actor who's basically doing two things at once, getting no sleep, Michael J. Fox, that you might want to extend things out a little bit. Instead, they made the release date earlier. They said, no, we're going to get it. We're going to release it in July. And so it was just crazy at the
they had to get that. They had to get that summer release period, which Star Wars started that. Used to,
that's
all
what
the
they
big
wanted.
films started in the fall, and Star Wars started in the summer and became the biggest hit in history. And so it became summer movie time when you had the escapist kind of shows, and this certainly was. And so that's one of the reasons they wanted that.
But if you release in August or September, it becomes, and now it's true, it's kind of problematic if you release in August or September, because you're going, oh, this was supposed to be a blockbuster, but it just didn't work very well. We're gonna scoot it out there in August, and they didn't want that feeling hovering over Back to the Future, so they back it up to to that July release date. And it blows my mind to think Michael J. Fox, I think it's as late as January 6th, 1985. That they hire him. It's in 1985. Not that he's shooting, they just hired him, and he's got to learn the script. And I think basically 2 weeks after that, they're starting to film.
And he can't start until after he's filmed his episodes, Family Ties, and then they film at night except on the weekends. And
exactly.
So he's having 3 hours of sleep a night or something like that. It's amazing it didn't kill him.
The union drivers had the key to his apartment, and they'd wake him up. Larry, Curly, and Moe, the union driver. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, I can imagine these big burly union drivers. And Michael J. Fox said they even would carry him to the car and deposit him in the car, which was not a DeLorean, but they'd carry him to the car and drive him to the set, and then he'd have to inhabit. He got a little confused, apparently, from time to time, just a little bit. Like where he was on 3 hours sleep. Was he on Family Ties or was he in the movie?
Yeah, well, That, yeah, I can imagine that was
And
something.
yet he's still coming up with those ad lib lines like the hope chest. Your jeans are on my hope chest. That's just ah,
Yeah, it is a singular movie. I mean, it's one of, I don't really, we could call it a time travel movie, but really it's a comedy. It's a screwball comedy, and the kind that they had not made for many years before this came out, and so. I think as long as you suspend your disbelief and not worry about the probabilities of the Oedipus complex, the grandfather paradox, and every other thing that would keep this from happening. I take it with the idea that time travel right now isn't possible anyway, so the rest of it can be made up too. So,
well, they kind of addressed, I thought, in a creative way, the paradox with the disappearing picture. If your parents don't meet, you won't exist,
yeah,
and that was a nice way to address. So, in this case, instead of the butterfly effect, well, he's already done the butterfly effect when he saved his dad and and gets run over by the dad and
yeah.
by the other dad, by the neighbor, and so he's already done the butterfly, so he's got to fix that. And the disappearing picture, I thought, was really clever, a nice way to
it's a nice metaphor, but you think about the paradox of that. If he would cease to exist, then he wouldn't have existed to go back in time to cause the problem. So that's
good points.
His parents would still have gotten together had he not been there. So
I'm starting to get a headache.
Yeah, you can get there. You can get there.
That's a Janeway. That Captain Janeway from Voyager always says, if you talk too much time travel, it just gives me a headache. And but yeah, that's an interesting point. If he had disappeared, then all would reset. That's a great point.
Yeah.
But it's just brilliant.
Okay, I found the other people that were considered for Doc. Dudley Moore, Jeffrey Tambor, and Michael Gross. Michael Gross also was in Family Ties.
Right. That's fascinating.
I don't know that they would have used both him and Michael J. Fox in that particular case, but
But it's interesting, like that list, like you mentioned earlier when you were going over some of the others on that list. All of them work. There's, sometimes you'll see alternate castings that you cannot imagine. Like Marlon Brando playing Doc. No, and that was not even considered. But all the ones you mentioned were really good. They would work. You could see them in their own way.
John Lithgow would have been their first choice, and they couldn't get him, and so they were just as happy because Christopher Lloyd was a very close second choice. But somewhere down the line, also Jeff Goldblum, and I would love to have seen Jeff Goldblum in that.
I would love to see that version too. That I would love. And you look at some of the things that that didn't happen, like and it gets back to those creative limitations, which George Lucas needed as Star Wars aged. He needed less money, or this instead of more, because if they'd have had the more money to do the nuclear, to drive the car to New Mexico, that just doesn't work. But the lightning bolt, they made that work so well, and it's so well thought out, layered in there. She writes "I love you" on the back of the flyer, and then again visual storytelling. This then and for Marty to say, what about when a girl writes this? What does that mean, Doc? And he holds that up. But then he can see the lightning from the other side, the clock tower, and it's just visual storytelling. Like in the first 10 minutes of the film, going to Doc's, we from all that we know that Doc. Nobody says anything, but we know that Doc is an inventor. Doc has a dog. The Doc has been gone. He's an inventor who's not there, and there's plutonium around there. And then what we do, a little bit of words, we do see the news with the missing plutonium and the Libyans, and it just works beautifully. It just. Well told story. I mean, it's their best film. The pair, Zemeckis and Bob Dale, I think they work together fairly often. Again, and it's by far the best. And it's funny. as though it's the film with the most heart. It is told for comedy, but some of his other films seem to be more mechanical in their comedy, like just a series of visual jokes, which can be funny. But this one really is well thought out, and it has a lot of heart, and that just makes everything better.
I think so. I
That's
love
my
the film. I've seen it many times. Surely you have as well. And it's now in its 40th anniversary. And
That's right.
Michael J. Fox has a book out about called Future Boy, about how the film was made, amongst other things that he talks about his previous life. So that's not a plug for the book. Well, I guess it's a plug. We don't get any money for it, though. No one's giving us any money for promoting Michael J. Fox's book.
No.
But
I mean,
that's fine.
Just it's you've seen the kid. I could try to think of some other times when you've seen a character and it's hard to do, form that fist. Well, it's in the Time Machine where the Eloi has to form a fist and he's going to punch out a Morlock. Remember, you see, it's like he's never done that. I'm going to fight, because all they do is eat and play, but he's going to fight because there's something worth fighting for. And it's interesting that both films kind of rhyme in that same way, because Marty's dad has got to form that fist and punch Biff, and what a punch! Whoa!
Yeah. Well, you would say, and you've taught film for many years, you would say that any kind of good film is something where a character has a major change.
Good
from
point.
The beginning to the end.
And in this case, right there.
In this case, it was George McFly.
It is George McFly. That's the arc. That is and everything is central to that. Marty, the parents meeting, getting back together, is central to that arc. And one thing and again, this was kind of giving a neighboring podcast. It's a podcast that talks about everything that could go wrong on films, and they did mention that they recast. They did not use Crispin, I believe, is the actor that
Crispin
played
Glover. Yeah,
Crispin Glover. They did not use Crispin Glover in parts 2 and 3. They got an actor.
He wanted more money for it, and they didn't want to pay that. And so what they did was they had another actor, and they put him upside down and disguised him as Crispin Glover. And Crispin Glover sued and won.
That I forgot about. That's right. That became a big deal with the Actors Guild was kind of supporting, and almost like it's not AI, but it was, the makeup was so effective that people were fooled. They didn't realize they did not realize they were not watching Crispin Glover in parts 2 and 3. I mean, it was a look-alike basically. Now, and kind of sets the precedent for AI, that you shouldn't do this with AI without the actor's permission, without artificial intelligence making you look like somebody. But instead, this was makeup, and apparently it was incredibly effective. Crispin Glover is sitting there watching the next film, and he realizes, he looks up, and I'm watching myself, but I was not paid to do this. And that's and not well handled on. Apparently there was something with Bob Dale and Crispin Glover that didn't click. But you watch him and you go, he's perfect. He was perfect for the part. He was as gangly and goofy and nerdy as he totally needed to be. And
Leah Thompson said that he was the funniest guy there, and I can believe that, because that was more of a stretch of any actor in there, is to play someone who is the worst nerd in the world and yet can come back and look normal at the end of the film. Mainstream. Let's say mainstream.
Mainstream. Yeah, that's what, and maybe they just overdid that. I wish he still could have had some of that. They made him a little too cool, like the wife sits on his lap and he's coming in from tennis. I thought some of that nerdiness was just who he should have remained to a point.
But he was still writing the science fiction books, but he obviously was more comfortable in his own skin, which is what essentially I think
that's a good point too. And he needed to show that also. That's exactly right. I just thought that maybe they could have found a little bit of balance, but that's just me tweaking a tiny bit. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned it. I'm watching the Time Machine, and there's Rod Taylor, and I was thinking of how old the actor that played Alan, what was his name? That his friend from the original Time Machine that plays his
Alan
friend.
Young. Alan Young.
Right, Alan Young. And so I'm thinking Alan Young's not that young anymore, but this guy looks like Alan Young, and I'm also kind of channeling that Alan Young had also played his own son.
He was yeah, he did, yeah. He was in his
In the-
90s when he died, so yeah, he was
Wait,
well
so this-
preserved.
But and in this, he would have been in when they shot this in 1987. He probably would have been in his 70s, and and they basically but it's actually him acting with Rod Taylor. But they got some makeup to make him look young because he's not supposed to have changed. It's maybe a couple 3 years later when the Traveler returns, and it worked perfectly. But at the makeup's so good, I'm thinking, did they do the same thing to this guy? They got another actor, and no, it's actually him. But that Crispin.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's they. I wish they had not have done that. It's just because he's just perfect for that part. And Leah Thompson was great.
Yes.
That's were there any? Was she pretty much? I can't remember. I looked a little bit at the alternative casting decisions, but I think you know that better. Were they looking at anybody else besides her, or was that pretty much?
Not that I know of. I didn't see anything that of the George or Elaine casting. So I think they got who they wanted to begin with.
They got exactly.
And
who they wanted
they
to.
certainly were good at it. It's interesting that they were able to age them so believably.
Right.
Both in the first of the picture and near the end of the picture, and and in fact, everybody was within 2 or 3 years of each other.
Right.
I mean, Crispin Glover was 2 years younger than, or 3 years younger than Michael J. Fox. Leah Thompson, I think, was his age, and I believe that. I forget, but anyway, the ages were interestingly all pretty much consistent, playing parents and children.
But
anyway, we are going longer than the movie has, however. We need to roll out of this. But I do have one more little thing that you might find interesting. Tom Wilson, who played Biff, was later in a guest star role on Legends of Tomorrow TV series in 2016. He's the father of the time-traveling superhero Nate Haywood. And his character says, "Make like a tree and leave," to which Nate replies, "I'm not sure how that goes."
That's fantastic. I'm glad they brought that back. This film is so good.
That's been such a line.
I was going to ask you what your favorite part of the film, because sometimes we'll all have films that you just will sit that it's Jaws, but then you'll sit down to watch maybe one part of Jaws, like when one of my favorite parts of Jaws is when they're sitting in the boat and they're comparing injuries, like, oh, I got this, and basically Richard Dreyfuss hasn't got anything, and they're, where did I get this scar? It's just a terrific part of the movie. But for Back to the Future, I was going to say, what's your favorite part? I can't necessarily isolate one favorite part. The film is so good, and once you sit down, you're just going to stay seated. If you find.
I agree with that. I think that it was all consistently good. The jokes kept coming, and you could almost forgive if there was any bad acting because the jokes were good.
Yeah, outstanding.
But anyway, I think we should call it a day for this because it's taken almost that long to do it. But
I did have a time travel joke.
Okay.
Well, I'm not going to tell it because you didn't like it, and so I looked. Yeah.
Well, I'm not the arbiter of funny. You can try it and see what the responses are. You can, of course.
Well, I went forward in time and you didn't like it, so we're just going to leave it.
If you'd like to make a comment, because you're all going to want to know what the joke was if we don't do it. You can do it by making a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. Okay, give me the joke.
That actually is the joke. I went forward in a time and you didn't like it, so I'm just not going to tell the joke.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's a dad time travel joke.
Okay, dad jokes. Hello, dad jokes. All right, thank you. We'll see you next week. We'll talk about another pair of movies and see what we can do with it. In the meantime, thank you for joining us. Until next time, Dr. Fox.